In my last life, I believed her, and in return, I got 20 years of hell. In this life, right in front of her, I dialed 110. The astonishment on her face was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. Jiang Qi, I'm begging you. You have to go save Qingwen. They're going to kill her. On the other end of the line, the kidnapper's vicious threats were still echoing in my ear. But in the next second, they were completely drowned out by my wife, Su Wan's wails. She gripped my arm tightly, her nails almost digging into my flesh. That pitifully lovely face I had looked at for over 20 years was now tear-stained, filled with despair and fear. We can't call the police. Absolutely not. They said if we call the police, they'll kill her. Jiang, Qing Yuan is your sister. You can't just abandon her. Jay Sween, my little sister-in-law. In my last life, it was because of Su Wan's words that I, in a rush of blood to the head, went to rescue her all by myself. The person was saved, but my life from that day on was dragged into an endless hell. After being kidnapped, such Qing developed severe PTSD and depression, and I, her savior, became the only thing she could cling to. When Swan and I ate, she would sit silently at our table with her bowl, watching me without a word. If I went to the bathroom, she would wait outside the door like a shadow until I came out. When Swan and I were in our bedroom as husband and wife, she would knock on our door precisely at midnight and ask in a tearful voice, "Brother, are you asleep? I am scared." When the three of us went out, outsiders would always mistake Su Qingwen and me for a couple, and then say to Swan, "Your sister and your husband seem so close." Every time this happened, Swan's face would grow a shade colder. Day after day, year after year, for a full 20 years, Swan's face was cold for 20 years. My son would point at my nose and curse me. "You're just a hypocrite. How would you do this to Mom? You deserve it." I deserved it. I also thought I deserved it. That I must have done something wicked in a past life to deserve such retribution in this one. I felt guilty towards Su Wan and tried desperately to make it up to her. But her heart was like a block of ice that could never be warmed until the three of us grew old and sick. Before Su Qingwen died, tormented by depression, she had become so thin she was barely recognizable as human. Swan, my wife, stood by the hospital bed, and in a venomous tone I had never heard before, whispered in Su Qingwen's ear, "You're so clingy. I worry you'll stick to the pan during cremation and they won't be able to scrape you off." At that moment, I was thunderstruck, and soon her resentment by association fell upon me, and my sick body rapidly deteriorated. On my deathbed, Swan's indifferent face was carved in my mind like a knife. "Jiang Ch, it's been 20 years. My debt to you for saving my sister has been repaid, but this is also what you two owed me. Don't worry, I'll live a good life with Chanine from now on. You'll surely bless us, won't you?" Chanine, our family's best friend, my son's godfather, the man who was always thoughtfully comforting Su Wan while I was at my wit's end over Su Qingwen's situation. So it was all a setup, a vicious scheme that had consumed 20 years of my life. Endless sorrow and hatred engulfed me. "Jiang Qi, what are you spacing out for? Qing Yuan is about to die." Swan screamed, "Pull me out of my hellish memories." I looked at her, at that familiar face filled with anxiety. Keep up the act. My heart was ice cold. In my last life, I was fooled by this very expression. This life, before her astonished eyes, I slowly raised my phone, my thumb precisely pressing 3 digits on the screen. 110. Then I pressed the green dial button. "Hello, is this 110? I want to report a crime." My voice was as calm as if I were discussing the weather. "My wife. Oh no, my sister-in-law has been kidnapped." Swan was completely stunned. She stared at me in disbelief as if looking at a stranger. In those beautiful eyes, for the first time, the facade of weakness faded, and a flash of genuine, undisguised panic and shock appeared. Yes, that's the expression. So beautiful. Facing her, I pulled a smile, the most genuine one I'd had in 20 years. "Don't be afraid, honey. We should trust the police." Swan's face instantly turned deathly pale. She looked at my smile as if she had seen a ghost. "Jiang, are you insane?" Swan finally snapped back to reality, screaming as she tried to snatch my phone. I dodged her with a simple turn of my body. On the other end of the line, the calm, professional voice of the dispatcher came through. "Sir, please remain calm and tell us the details. Where are you right now?" "I'm in Unit X, Building XXX Community. My wife, Swan, just received a call from kidnappers. Her sister, such Ching Yuan, has been kidnapped. They're demanding a ransom of 500,000 and have threatened us not to call the police." My speech was clear and orderly, conveying every piece of information without omission. Every word was like a heavy hammer striking Swan's heart. Her face turned from deathly pale to ashen. The hand gripping my arm trembled violently from a force. "Who told you to call the police? Who told you to call the police? Jiang Che, are you trying to get Qing Yuan killed?" She lowered her voice, hissing, every word squeezed through her teeth. "See, now she's getting anxious. Are you worried about your sister being killed? Or are you worried about the police disrupting your plan?" I hung up the phone and grabbed her cold wrist, my face still wearing that considerate smile. "Darling, don't get worked up. 500,000 is no small sum. Where would our family get that kind of money? Besides, how can you trust kidnappers? What if we pay the ransom and they still don't release her? Calling the police is the safest option." This reasoning was logical and irrefutable. In my past life, this was exactly how I persuaded Su Wan to agree to me calling the police. But what did she say then? She cried and said, "The money isn't important. Qing Yuan's life is. If we don't have it, I can borrow it. Januki, I'm begging you. Qing Yuan has always listened to you the most since she was little. If you go save her, she'll surely feel at ease." Thinking back on it now, it's truly laughable. She wasn't afraid of me calling the police. She was afraid that police intervention would prevent her subsequent plan to have such Qin justifiably latch onto me and torment me for being carried out. As expected, Swan was left speechless by my words. She stared at me intently, her eyes filled with scrutiny and suspicion. "Go on and suspect. Suspect all you want. You'll soon discover that this is only the beginning." Ding dong, the doorbell rang. Swan flinched, a flicker of panic crossing her face. I walked over and opened the door. Standing outside was a well-dressed man with a worried expression. Shenzhen. The moment he stepped inside without even stopping to change his shoes, he asked urgently, "The one, how is everything?" I rushed over as soon as I got your call. Qinggueni. His gaze fell on Su Wan's pale face, full of heartache. Then, as if only just noticing me, he turned to me. "Jean Shay, you're here too about this matter." I looked at him expressionlessly. "Act. You two keep acting, truly a pair of star-crossed lovers." As if she had found her backbone, Swan grabbed Qinjin's arm, her voice trembling. "Qinzin, Jiangue," he called the police. Qin's face instantly changed color. He looked at me in shock, his brow furrowed, his tone tinged with blame. "Jiang, how could you be so foolish? The kidnappers made it very clear not to call the police. What if they get provoked? If anything happens to Qing Yuan?" He didn't finish, but his eyes clearly said, "You're the murderer." What a well-rehearsed act. In my last life, I was completely fooled by their charade, thinking that Chanin, my good brother, was the only one in the world who genuinely had our best interests at heart. I sneered and was about to speak. Thump, thump, thump. A series of rapid, forceful knocks sounded at the door, accompanied by a loud, sharp command. "Police, open up." Swan and Qinzin both froze. They exchanged a look, and in that glance was a panic and bewilderment I had never understood in my past life. I pulled open the door. Several uniformed police officers with stern expressions and piercing gazes stood outside. "Who is Jiang Che?" the lead officer asked. "I am," I answered calmly. The officer's gaze swept over me, then over the pale-faced Su Wan and Shining behind me. "Come with us to the station. We need to get the details of the situation." Swan swayed, nearly losing her balance. Shenzhen quickly supported her, comforting her in a low voice. "Don't be afraid. Awan, I'm here." The gesture was so intimate, leaving no room for doubt. The police officer's brow furrowed slightly as he looked at them, then back at me, the husband. I said nothing, merely following silently behind the police. The real show is just beginning. Swan Chanine, are you ready? It's time to settle the debts from these 20 years one by one. Inside the police car, the atmosphere was dreadfully oppressive. I sat in the front, and through the rearview mirror, I could clearly see Sue, Juan, and Chanzine sitting close together in the back. Swan's head rested lightly on Shenzin's shoulder like a frightened bird, and Chanine, with the posture of a protector, had his arm gently around her. The young police officer driving glanced through the rearview mirror, a flicker of strangeness in his eyes. Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? The husband who reported the crime is as calm as a stranger, while the wife's good friend acts more like the husband than the husband himself. When we arrived at the police station, we were separated for questioning. The one responsible for taking my statement was an experienced veteran police officer, surnamed Lee. Mr. Jiang, please repeat the contents of the kidnapper's phone call word for word. Officer Lee's gaze was sharp, as if it could see right through a person's heart. I nodded and began to recall. In my past life, because of extreme panic and anger, I didn't remember many details at all. But in this life, I heard everything crystal clear. The kidnapper's voice was hoarse, as if he was deliberately lowering it. It had a bit of a northern accent, but not a strong one. He said he wanted $500,000 to have the cash ready before noon tomorrow and to wait for his call. No sequential serial numbers, no new bills. I paused, then added a crucial detail. Moreover, I heard a background noise on the call. Officer Lee's eyes lit up. What sound? Very faint, like a ship's whistle. The kind that's deep and muffled, coming from a distance. This was the sound I heard with my own ears in my past life when I went to that abandoned pier alone. It was also the key clue the police deeply regretted missing when they reviewed the case later. Officer Lee immediately drew a heavy circle in his notebook. A ship's whistle. Good. This clue is very important. He gave me an appreciative look. Mr. Jiang, you are very calm. That is extremely helpful for our investigation. I gave a wry smile. How could I be calm when my own sister-in-law has been kidnapped? I'm just forcing myself to remember every detail, hoping I can help. Yes, calm. As calm as if I have a god's eye view. I acted like a good brother-in-law who was terrified, but trying his best to remain rational. This appearance was the least likely to arouse suspicion. The questioning lasted for nearly an hour. When I came out of the interrogation room, I immediately saw Sue, Juan, and Chanine waiting in the hallway. The moment Swan saw me, she rushed over, grabbed my clothes, and questioned in a low voice, "What did you tell the police?" Her eyes were full of urgency and scrutiny. "What are you afraid of?" "Afraid I said something I shouldn't have." I said what needed to be said. I pulled my hand away from her grasp, my tone calm. The kidnapper's demands and some details I heard. What details? Chanine also walked over, subtly positioning himself between me and Swan. His gaze heavy as he looked at me. I looked at him and suddenly smiled. Nothing much, just that I heard a bit of a ship's whistle. I told the police. They seemed to take it quite seriously. As soon as the words left my mouth, I clearly saw Chun Jin's pupils suddenly contract. Although it was only for a moment, so fast it was almost imperceptible, his hand on Swan's shoulder tightened unconsciously. Swan's body also stiffened for an instant. This is it. The abandoned pier, right? In my past life, the kidnappers had hidden Su Qingwen in a warehouse and abandoned pier on the outskirts of the city. The place was deserted, with only a single waterway leading out. And that pier was one of the properties abandoned years ago by Chun Jin's family company. This was all the truth I had pieced together from fragmented conversations I overheard after I died. A ship. Swan forced a smile, her expression a little unnatural. Are you sure you didn't miss here? Our home is so far from the river. How could you hear a ship's whistle? Maybe. I shrugged with an uncertain look on my face. I was just saying maybe I was hearing things. The more uncertain I acted, the more uneasy they became. Watching the two of them, wanting to ask but not daring to, exchanging glances of shock and suspicion, a wave of morbid pleasure washed over me. Don't worry, this is just the beginning. In the last life, you made me guess for 20 years. In this life, it's your turn. Just then, Officer Lee came hurrying out of his office, a hint of joy on his face. Mr. Jiang, the clue you provided was crucial. We've investigated all the piers in the city and combined with the Skynet surveillance. We have preliminarily locked onto the trail of the kidnapper's vehicle. The target is the Donghai abandoned pier on the city outskirts. Officer Lee's voice wasn't loud, but in the empty hallway, it was perfectly clear. At that moment, all the color drained from Swan's and Chun Jin's faces. The police's operational efficiency was beyond imagination. After locking onto the Donghai abandoned pier, the SWAT team was immediately dispatched. Swan, Chanine, and I were told to stay at the police station and wait for news. Every second of the wait felt like being roasted over a fire. Of course, I wasn't the one being roasted. I sat on a cold bench, quietly watching the two restless people across from me. Swan was wringing her hands incessantly, her lips bitten white. Her gaze drifted anxiously towards the end of the hallway from time to time. Chanine, on the other hand, frequently checked his phone with a furrowed brow, his fingers tapping rapidly on the screen as if contacting someone. Tipping off your accomplice. Too late. In my past life, a full 5 hours had passed between me receiving the call and rushing to the docks. Those 5 hours gave the kidnappers ample time to prepare and ample time to torture Swan. But in this life, it only took a little over an hour from reporting the crime to the police locking onto the target. I'd like to see how you carry out your plan now. About an hour later, Officer Lee's phone rang. He answered it, and after a few his expression turned grave. The air in the entire hallway seemed to freeze. Swan shot to her feet, staring intently at Officer Lee, her body trembling slightly with tension. Shenzhen also put away his phone and stood by her side, his expression solemn. Finally, Officer Lee hung up and strode towards us. The hostage has been successfully rescued. That short sentence landed like a bomb. Swan's body suddenly went limp, and she nearly collapsed, caught by Chinese just in time. Her face was a mixture of relief, lingering fear, and a flicker of disappointment that I could understand. One that was hard to notice. Disappointed that Su Qingwen was rescued too quickly before she had the chance to suffer enough psychological trauma. Is that it? The hostage is currently very unstable and extremely frightened, but she has not sustained any actual physical harm. The two kidnappers were arrested on the spot and are being escorted back now. Officer Lee looked at us, announcing the good news. That's wonderful. Wonderful. Swan covered her face and finally began to cry, but there was little joy in her voice. Chanine patted her back, comforting her softly. It's okay, Awan. Ching-een is safe. He turned his head to me, forcing a smile that was uglier than a grimace. Zhang Shay, it's all thanks to you for reporting it in time otherwise. I looked at him coldly. Thanks to me for reporting it in time and disrupting your entire plan. Soon, an ambulance came roaring up. Such Qing Yuan was carried out on a stretcher by the paramedics. Her eyes were shut tight, her body was trembling, and she kept muttering, Don't come near me. Her young face was filled with terror. Suguan Rash for Inyuan Qingwen. Big sister is here. However, such Qingwen didn't react to her calls at all, lost in her own fear. After a brief examination, the doctor told us the patient has suffered a severe psychological shock and needs to be sent to the hospital immediately for psychological intervention. Family members, please come with us. Swan and Chanine were about to get into the ambulance, but I stopped them. Wait a minute. Everyone looked at me. I walked to the side of the stretcher and looked at Su Qing Yuan's pale little face. Qingwen, I know you're terrified right now, but don't be afraid. In this life, I won't let anyone use your pain again. I turned around, looked at Su Wan, and said in a tone that brooked no argument. What Qing needs right now is quiet and professional treatment. I've already contacted Mom and Dad, and they will go to the hospital immediately. You shouldn't go. Swan was stunned. Why? I'm her sister. Precisely because you are her sister. You're so emotional right now. You'll only agitate her if you go. I looked at her, my gaze calm and cold. Besides, you need to stay here. There's something more important for you to do. A trace of confusion flashed in Swan's eyes. I slowly raised my phone. On the screen was a bank text message I had just received. It was from my salary account. It showed that just half an hour ago, a a sum of 500,000 had been transferred out. The recipient account was under a stranger's name, and as it happened, I recognized that name. It was the name of one of the kidnappers from my past life. I turned the phone screen towards Swan and Shanine beside her, asking word by word, "My wife, can you explain this to me? Why was our family's emergency money transferred perfectly on time into the kidnapper's account just moments before the police rescued her?" Chapter 5. My voice wasn't loud, but it exploded like a depth charge in the hearts of everyone present. The air was instantly dead silent. The color drained from Sue Wan's face in an instant. She stared at the transfer record on my phone, her lips trembling, unable to utter a single word. Shinjin's expression also turned extremely ugly. He subconsciously tried to pull Sue Wan, but my icy gaze forced him back. Officer Lee, ever so sharp, immediately sensed something was wrong. He strode over and took the phone from my hand. A single glance, and his face darkened. 500,000, recipient Wong Hu. He looked up, his sharp eyes pinning Sue Wan like nails. "Miss Sue Wan, this Wong, who we have just confirmed, is one of the two kidnappers. Can you explain why you transferred the ransom money to the kidnapper before the hostage was rescued?" Swan's body began to tremble violently. She looked pleadingly at Shenzhen, her eyes filled with panic and fear. Shenzhen immediately stepped forward, shielding Swan, and explained anxiously, "Officer Lee, this must be a misunderstanding. Awan was just desperate to save her. The kidnappers must have contacted her again and forced her to send the money. She's just a woman. She was scared out of her wits. How could she think clearly? The kidnappers contacted her." I interrupted him with a cold laugh. "How they contact her? Her phone has been monitored by the police since we reported the case. There were no suspicious calls." I turned to Swan, pressing her step by step. "Honey, tell me, how did you bypass the police monitoring to get in touch with the kidnappers? Or is it that you didn't need to contact them at all, because you already knew the account number?" Pushed back by my questions, Swan stumbled, only kept from falling by Chinese, who caught her. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a stranger's fear, as if seeing me for the first time. "I don't know. I don't know anything," she argued incoherently. "It wasn't me. I didn't transfer any money." "You didn't?" I took out my own phone, opened the banking app to the login screen. "Our family savings have always been in my salary account. Only the two of us know the password. If it wasn't you, was it me?" I held the phone out to her. "Go on. In front of the police, enter the password. Let's see if you misremembered." Swan stared at my phone as if it were a hot potato, her face as white as a sheet. How could she dare? Shinjin knew that password, too. In my past life, Swan had used the excuse of needing money urgently for family to get the bank card password for me, and then told Shinj without a second thought. The two of them had long since figured out all my cards. "Enough!" Shinj suddenly shouted, pulling Sue Wan behind him protectively. "Jang, what are you trying to do? Qingwen was just rescued, and instead of caring for her, you're here interrogating your wife. Do you have any conscience?" He was self-righteous, playing the part of a perfect protector. My conscience? My conscience was devoured completely by you two wretched dogs in that 20-year hell of my past life. I just want to know the truth. I met his gaze calmly. "Chinzine, why are you so agitated? This seems to be a matter between my wife and me, right? Or perhaps this has something to do with you, too." Shunjin's face froze. Just then, Officer Lee's walkie-talkie crackled. He listened for a few moments, his expression growing graver. Ending the communication, he looked at Sue Wan and Chanine, his voice icy. "We just had a breakthrough in the interrogation. The kidnapper, Wong, who confessed. He said that this kidnapping was an inside job. Someone provided information on Miss Su Ching Yuan's whereabouts and promised that the ransom would be transferred to his account after it was done, and the inside contact who provided him with the information and promised the reward." Officer Lee's gaze swept back and forth between Su Wan and Shinjin, finally landing on Shinzin's face. "Was it you, Mr. Chun?" Chapter 6 was as if the entire world had been muted. The color instantly drained from Chun Jin's face. That gentle and refined mask shattered with a crash, leaving only naked shock and panic. "No, he's lying. This is slander," he shrieked in rebuttal, his voice changing pitch. Swan looked as if she had been struck by lightning. She stared at Shinjin in disbelief, then whipped her head towards me, her eyes filled with confusion and despair. "What's the matter? Didn't expect the professionals you hired to be so unreliable? Or did you not expect that a single phone call from me would cut off all your escape routes?" I sneered inwardly, but on my face I wore an expression of shock and heartache. I staggered back a step, pointing at Chinzine, my voice trembling. "Chanine, it was you. Why were we the best of friends? Qingwen, she even calls you Uncle Chun. My performance was just right, perfectly embodying the image of a pitiful man betrayed by both his best friend and his wife." The surrounding police officers looked at me with sympathy in their eyes, and their gazes towards Chanine and Swan were filled with contempt and scrutiny. I didn't. I really didn't. Chanine was still trying to justify himself in vain. "Officers, you can't believe the one-sided story of a kidnapper. He's retaliating. It must be Zhang CH. Yes, it must be Zhang CH who told him to say that. He wants to frame me." He started to lash out indiscriminately like a mad dog. Officer Li snorted coldly. "Frame you? We've just checked your call history. An hour before the kidnapping, you had a 3-minute call with the kidnapper. Wang Ho, do you still want to argue?" The evidence was irrefutable. Shinjin's last shred of hope was completely shattered. He went limp, his eyes vacant, muttering to himself, "It's over. It's all over." Seeing him in that state, Swan finally realized the situation was hopeless. Her body swayed, and suddenly she did something I never expected. With a thud, she knelt before me. "Zhang Qi, I am sorry. I'm so sorry." She hugged my leg and burst into tears. "It's all my fault. I was possessed. I love you too much. I was jealous. I was jealous of Qin Yuan's good relationship with you. I was afraid you'd be snatched away by her. That's why I asked Shinj for help to teach her a lesson. I never wanted to kill her. I just wanted to scare her to make her stay away from you in the future." She cried her heart out, her words filled with genuine emotion and sorrow. She took all the blame upon herself, portraying herself as a pitiful woman who had gone astray due to jealousy born from love. At the same time, she exonerated Shinjin, painting him as a tool she had used. What a brilliant move to sacrifice the pawn to save a king. If I were still the fool from my previous life, I might have actually softened and believed her nonsense. Unfortunately, I was not that person anymore. I looked at Sue, one kneeling on the ground, her shoulders shaking with sobs, and felt not a single ripple in my heart. "Act. Keep acting. Your tears are worthless to me now." Slowly, one by one, I pried her fingers from my calf. Then I squatted down to her, leveling my voice so only the two of us could hear. I whispered something in her ear. "Wife, you forgot to tell them. In our last life, that's not what you said." Swan's crying came to an abrupt halt. She shot her head up, staring at me as if she had seen a ghost, her pupils shrinking to tiny dots in utter terror. Chapter 7. What did you say?" Swan's voice trembled uncontrollably. The tear tracks on her face were still wet, but her eyes were filled with horror. "What am I saying? You don't understand." I looked at her, the curve of my lips growing colder. I said, "In our last life, you told me personally that you and Shanine would live a good life together. You even asked me if I would bless you. What? You've forgotten so soon?" Every word was like an ice pick stabbing viciously into Swan's heart. Her face turned from deathly pale to ashen gray, as if all the blood had been drained from her body in that instant. You. She pointed at me, a gurgling sound escaping her throat, unable to form a complete word. "Rebirth." This utterly absurd, yet only logical explanation struck through all her disguises and calculations like a bolt of lightning. She finally understood. She understood why I had become so strange, so calm, so terrifying. From the moment I received the kidnapper's call, I wasn't throwing a tantrum, nor was I being foolish. I was seeking revenge, carrying 20 years of a blood feud. I had returned to claim her life. Fear, an unprecedented fear, engulfed her like a tidal wave. She looked into my eyes, and in them there was not a trace of love or pity, only a dead, desolate wasteland burning with black flames. No, no. She shook her head frantically, shrinking back as if I were some kind of monster. The surrounding police officers frowned as they watched this bizarre scene unfold. Officer Lee took a step forward and asked in a deep voice, "Jang, Swan, what are you two talking about?" I stood up, my expression reverting to one of grief and devastation. "It's nothing, officer." I pointed at the nearly collapsed Swan, my voice trembling. "I just can't believe that my wife would do such a demented thing out of jealousy. She just told me she only wanted to teach Qing Yuan a lesson, but I can't accept that. That's her own sister." My accusation drew everyone's attention back. They looked at Swan, who was kneeling on the ground, looking like a madwoman. Their eyes filled with disgust. Jealousy born from love. What kind of reason was that? This was simply the heart of a viper. Shinjin looked at Swan's distraught state and knew he couldn't count on her anymore. A hint of determination flashed in his eyes, and he suddenly shouted, "It was me. I did it all by myself. It has nothing to do with Awan." He tried to take all the blame. "I was jealous of John Che. I've liked Awan for many years, but she married Jiang Sich. I couldn't accept it. So, I wanted to devise a plan to break them up. Kidnap Su Qingyuan, then frame Jiang Ch to make Awan completely give up on him. I planned everything. Awan knew nothing about it from beginning to end. What a great love. What a ridiculous lie." Hearing Chun Jin's words, Swan, as if grasping at a final straw, also began to scream, "Yes, it was him. He forced me to do it. I didn't know. I didn't know anything." The two of them began to tear at each other, one desperately trying to protect, the other desperately trying to push away. The scene became incredibly ugly. I watched this farce with cold eyes. When dogs bite dogs, you get a mouthful of fur. Do you think you could get away with this? I cleared my throat and said to Officer Lee in a tone of extreme exhaustion and disappointment, "Officer Lee, I don't want to see them again. Regarding my wife, Swan, I have one more thing to report." The sound of Swan and Shinjin's squabbling stopped instantly. They looked at me in terror at the same time. I spoke slowly, dropping the last and most fatal bomb. "She is suspected of embezzlement. Just last month, she took advantage of her position as the company's accountant to misappropriate a sum of $200,000 in public funds. And I've checked the transaction records for that money. The account." I paused, my gaze sweeping over Chun Jin's face, which had instantly lost all its color. "The account holder is none other than Mr. Chun." Chapter 8. If the kidnapping plot could be explained away with a nonsense excuse of jealousy born from love, then embezzlement and illegal transfer of funds were irrefutable criminal offenses. This final blow completely sealed off any escape route for Swan and Shinjin. Su Wan collapsed on the floor without even the strength to cry. She just stared at me with empty eyes, as if to carve my image into her very bones. In that gaze, there was hatred. There was resentment. But more than that, there was the despair of being utterly crushed, of the world ending. Shanin looked as if all the bones had been removed from his body. He completely fell apart. He knew it was all over. The mastermind of a kidnapping plus an accomplice to embezzlement. What awaited him was a long time in prison. Officer Lee immediately arranged for someone to verify the information I reported. The chain of evidence for financial crimes was far easier to lock down than the more subjective motive for a kidnapping. In less than half a day, the results were in. The evidence was conclusive. Su Wan and Shanin were formally placed under criminal detention. When they, wearing cold handcuffs, were escorted past me by the police, I didn't even give them a second glance. I just calmly completed the remaining procedures and then walked out of this place where I had spent 2 lifetimes. Outside, the sun was brilliant, stinging my eyes and making them water. I took a deep breath of the free air, which didn't have the smell of hospital disinfectant, the persistent scent of medicine that always clung to Su Qingyuan or Su Wan's frosty cold aura. It was good. I took out my phone and dialed my father-in-law's number. In my previous life, because of Su Qingyuan's situation, the elderly couple felt guilty towards me and granted my every request. But because of their daughter's tragedy, their hair turned white overnight. And Su Wan used their guilt to firmly control the entire family. In this life, I would not let them be kept in the dark again. The call connected. Hello, Jiang Sich. How is Qing Yuan? You and Awan. My father-in-law's voice was full of anxiety. Dad, I interrupted him. Qing is in the hospital, and her mood has temporarily stabilized. But I have something else, something more important that I must tell you and Mom about Su Wan and also about Shanine. I recounted the entire sequence of events in the calmest, most objective tone possible, including the truth of the kidnapping, including Su Wan and Chun Jin's affair, and the fact that they had conspired to embezzle company funds. On the other end of the line, there was a long, deathly silence. I could imagine the shock and heartbreak the elderly couple must be feeling at that moment. For a long time, my father-in-law's old and tired voice sounded again, trembling uncontrollably. Jiang Ch, is what you said all true? Dad, I guarantee it with my character, I said word by word. The police have already opened a case, and the evidence is conclusive. Su Wan and Shanine have been taken into criminal custody. On the other end of the line, there was a dull thud, as if something had fallen to the floor. Immediately after came my mother-in-law's heart-wrenching wails. I listened quietly without a trace of pity in my heart. This was something they had to bear. Raising a daughter like Su Wan was their misfortune and also their failure of duty. Jiang Ji, my father-in-law's voice seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. We've wronged you, Dad. You don't have to say you're sorry, I said calmly. I didn't call you to hear an apology. I'm here to inform you of something. I will file for divorce immediately. From now on, I have no relationship with your Su family. Chapter 9. My divorce proceedings went exceptionally smoothly. As the party at fault and being in prison, Su Wan had no capital to negotiate with me at all. We had no children, and the division of property was extremely simple. For the house we bought together after marriage, because I took the initiative to present evidence of Su Wan colluding with Chun Jin to embezzle the savings from my bank card, the court finally ruled that 2/3 of the property belonged to me without any hesitation. On the day I received the judgment, I contacted an agent and put the house up for sale. I didn't want to stay in this place full of lies and betrayal for another moment. The two elders of the Su family never contacted me again from beginning to end. I could imagine their torment. One daughter was a victim. The other was the perpetrator, both with her own flesh and blood, but one was good and the other was a poisonous sore rotten to the bone. Outsiders could not comprehend this kind of pain. As for Su Qingyuan, I had never visited her in the hospital since that one meeting at the police station entrance. I only occasionally inquired about her condition from the side. I heard that the mental trauma she suffered this time was far less severe than in the previous life. After all, she was rescued in time and did not experience those long hours of darkness and torture. Moreover, without me, her savior, as an emotional crutch, and without Su Wan's daily psychological suggestions in her ear, her recovery process, though slow, was steadily moving in a positive direction. She was no longer obsessed with finding a hero to rely on, but was learning to stand up on her own under the guidance of a psychiatrist. This was the best outcome for me and for her. I sold the house, took the money, and left the city that had suppressed me for 20 years. I found a small southern town with beautiful scenery, rented a small apartment, and started a new life. I didn't look for a job again. In my previous life, I was like a tethered donkey, working myself to death for that family, only to end up with my family destroyed. In this life, I wanted to live for myself. I started to read, paint, and travel. Bit by bit, I reclaimed the 20 stolen years. I thought my life would continue on peacefully like this until I grew old and died. Until that day, I received a call from a strange number. On the other end of the line was a cautious, slightly timid female voice. "Is this Brother Jiang?" I was stunned for a moment. This form of address was both familiar and strange. It was Su Qingwen. I was silent for a moment, then gave a faint, "I got your number from my parents." Her voice was a little nervous. "I just wanted to say sorry to you. And thank you." I was a little surprised. "Sorry for what? And thank me for what?" "I am sorry, my sister, for what she did to you." There was a hint of a sob in Su Qingwen's voice. "Thank you. Thank you for calling the police that day and saving me." Her logic was very clear. She didn't confuse right and wrong just because Sue was her sister. It's all in the past, I said calmly. She was silent for a while, seeming to gather her courage. I'd like to come to your city in a few days to relax and clear my head. Is that okay? My brow furrowed unconsciously. Relax and clear her head. Or is she coming to find me? The suffocating feeling of being constantly entangled in the previous life instantly flooded my mind. My tone couldn't help but turn cold. We have no relationship anymore. I don't want to have any involvement with anyone from your Sioux family ever again. After I finished speaking, I hung up the phone directly. I thought my rejection had been clear enough, but I didn't expect that 3 days later my doorbell would still ring. Chapter 10. I opened the door and saw a face that was familiar yet somewhat strange. Suin. She stood outside wearing a simple white dress. Her long hair draped over her shoulders. She looked a bit thinner than a year ago, but her complexion was much better. Those eyes, once always filled with terror and dependence, were now looking at me with a trace of apprehension and persistence. By her feet was a small suitcase. Brother Janguki. She gave me a smile, a somewhat forced one, and my expression instantly darkened. I thought I made myself very clear on the phone last time. I know. Suchin lowered her head, her voice very soft, but I still wanted to come and thank you in person. Are you done? I leaned against the door frame, showing no intention of letting her in. Then you can leave. My coldness and inhumanity made the smile on her face vanish completely. The rims of her eyes slowly turned red, her lips trembling slightly. Brother Jinsa, are you still angry at my sister? Of course I am, I said. I don't want to have anything to do with your Sioux family anymore. I repeated, my tone already laced with impatience. That includes you. Why? She lifted her head, looking at me stubbornly. My sister is my sister, and I am me. Why should I be implicated in the mistake she made? This is unfair to me. Fair. It was as if I had heard the biggest joke in the world. Fair. I let out a cold laugh. Suching, you're talking to me about fairness. In my past life, you haunted me like a lingering spirit for 20 years. Ruined my job, my life, my everything. Did you ever talk to me about fairness then? When your sister and I ate, you watched from the side. When I went to the bathroom, you waited outside. When your sister and I were intimate as husband and wife, you came knocking in the middle of the night. Do you think that was fair to me? Everyone thought we were the couple. Your sister wore a cold face for 20 years, and my own son pointed at my nose and cursed that I deserved it. At that time, why didn't you stand up and tell me? This is unfair to you. The resentment I had accumulated over 2 lifetimes erupted at this moment like a volcano, holding nothing back. Every word was like a knife, stabbing viciously into Su Qingyuan's heart. Her face instantly turned ashen white, her body swaying as if about to collapse. She had probably never imagined that the brother-in-law who in her heart was gentle, strong, and godlike would attack her with such harsh, venomous words. I didn't know. Her voice trembled uncontrollably, and tears rolled down like broken strings of pearls. I was sick back then. I couldn't control myself. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to? I advanced on her, backing her into a corner. Does a simple, I was sick erase all the harm you brought me? Suching, you and your sister are cut from the same cloth. She destroyed my spirit with the kidnapping, and you destroyed my life with your illness. You 2 sisters, you're really something. My words, like the most vicious curse, completely shattered her final line of mental defense. She covered her face and crouched on the ground, letting out desperate and painful sobs. Watching her break down, I felt not a single shred of pleasure in my heart, only a hollow, boundless exhaustion. Enough. It's all over. I stepped back into the room, pulled a few bills from my wallet, and threw them at her feet. Take the money, buy a ticket, and go back to wherever you came from. From now on, don't ever appear in front of me again. After I finished speaking, I slammed the door shut with a bang, completely shutting out the heart-wrenching cries. Outside, Su Qingyuan's crying gradually subsided and finally disappeared completely. I thought she had left. I thought this nightmare that had entangled 2 lifetimes had finally come to an end. However, in the middle of the night, I was woken up by a series of urgent phone rings. It was the property management. "Hello, is this Mr. Jang? Can you come down for a moment? At your doorstep, there's a girl. It looks like she slit her wrists." My mind went buzz and then completely blank. Slit her wrists. These words, like a dull, rusty knife, twisted viciously in the most unbearable part of my memory from the past life. Such Qing Yuan was just like this. Whenever I showed the slightest sign of distancing myself from her, she would use self-harm to gain my attention and guilt. Every time I had no choice but to compromise. Every time I felt myself being strangled tighter by an invisible chain. Here we go again. Do you think I'll fall for it again? A violent anger rose from the bottom of my heart. I grabbed my coat and rushed downstairs. In the hallway, a few neighbors and the property security guards had already gathered. Such Qing Yuan was lying on the cold floor tiles, her face as pale as a sheet of paper. On her wrist, a hideous wound was shocking to the eye, and fresh blood had stained her white dress red. Beside her were scattered the few banknotes I had thrown at her during the day. My heart twinged inexplicably, but it was immediately replaced by a deeper disgust and annoyance. The security guard had already called for an ambulance. With a cold expression, I stood outside the crowd like an unconcerned bystander. A neighbor recognized me and started whispering, "Hey, isn't that Mr. Jang from upstairs? It seems this girl came looking for him." She was crying at the door in the afternoon, so heartbroken. I didn't expect her to do something so foolish. Young people these days just can't get over matters of the heart. Their discussions were like needles stabbing into my ears. See, here it comes again. Moral blackmail, public pressure. Everyone thinks I'm the heartless man. Who should be responsible? I clench my fists, my nails digging deep into my palms. The ambulance arrived quickly. Doctors and nurses rushed down and began emergency treatment. A nurse looked up, saw me, and shouted urgently, "Where's the family? Who is the patient's family? Get in the ambulance with us quickly." Everyone's eyes fell on me in unison. I stood there motionless. My throat felt as if it were blocked by something, unable to make sound. To go or not to go? If I went, would it mean I had fallen into this cyclical trap once again? Would it mean that what followed would be endless entanglement and torment? But if I didn't go, that was a human life. A girl who had once lively called me brother-in-law. Just as I was wrestling with myself, Su Qing, who was being lifted onto the stretcher, suddenly opened her eyes slightly. Her gaze was unfocused, yet found me with precision. Her lips moved, and with the last ounce of her strength, she uttered 2 words. "Brother, save." Then her head tilted to one side, and she completely lost consciousness. That "save me" was like a bolt of lightning shattering all my icy resolve and defenses. It overlapped with a girl from 20 years ago tied up in an abandoned warehouse. Her face stained with tears, who cried out, "Brother, save me," when she saw me. At that moment, I had to admit, even though I hated the Su family to the bone, hated this ruined life, towards Su Qing Yuan, the most innocent pawn in this tragedy, I could never truly be heartless. I cursed under my breath, pushed through the crowd, and rushed onto the ambulance. "Jang Ch, you're an idiot. You deserve it." I cursed myself viciously in my heart, just like how my son had cursed me in my past life. Outside the hospital's emergency room, I sat alone on a cold bench, sleepless all night. At dawn, the doctor came out. "The patient is out of danger." Thankfully, she was brought in just in time, but she lost a lot of blood and is emotionally unstable, so she needs to be hospitalized for observation for a while. I nodded and said, "Thank you." Entering the ward, Su Qing lay quietly in bed, her wrist wrapped in thick gauze, her face devoid of any color. She wasn't awake yet, and undried teardrops still clung to her long eyelashes. I looked at her, my feelings a complicated mess. Hate her? Of course I did. I hated her for her entanglement in the last life, and hated her for using the same method to force my hand in this one. But the moment I saw her lying in a pool of blood in the hallway, the panic and fear in my heart were real. After all, I am not a cold-blooded animal like Swan. I couldn't just stand by and watch a life fade away because of me. I sat in the chair by the bed, watching the sky gradually lighten outside the window. And for the first time, I began to seriously reflect. I was reborn to take revenge, to escape the nightmare, to start a new life. Swan and Shinjin had already received the punishment they deserved. My revenge was complete. But had my new life truly begun? I fled that city, fled everyone I knew, and closed myself off. I thought this was freedom. But when Sachinu reappeared, using the most extreme method to pull me back to reality, I realized I hadn't moved on at all. I was just running away. What I feared wasn't Su Qing herself. I feared repeating the fate of my past life. I was afraid of being held hostage by responsibility and guilt again, of falling back into that endless quagmire. So I used the most hurtful words to attack her, trying to make her give up on me completely, trying to push her far, far away. But what was the result? I almost became the murderer who drove her to her death. If she had really died, what difference would there be between me and Swan? I would be tormented for the rest of my life by a new sense of guilt and self-blame. That would be true damnation. The vibration of a cell phone interrupted my thoughts. It was a text message from a bank. The money from the sale of my house had arrived. Looking at the long string of numbers, I suddenly found it somewhat laughable. I had gone to great lengths to break free from the past, gaining money and freedom, but my heart was still trapped in the same place. Just then, Sachinu on the bed, her eyelashes trembled slightly, and she slowly opened her eyes. When she saw me, a flash of joy crossed her eyes, but then it dimmed, filled with fear and unease. "I am sorry, too," she spoke in a hoarse voice, tears streaming down her face again. "I didn't mean to. I just didn't know what to do anymore." I looked at her without speaking for a long time. I stood up, walked to the window, and opened the curtains. Bright sunlight instantly filled the entire hospital room. I turned around, looked at Sachinu, bathed in the sunlight, and spoke calmly. "What are your plans after you leave the hospital?" She was stunned, not expecting me to ask this. I don't know. "Then go to school," I said. "Didn't you always want to be a painter? I'll sponsor you." Sukanu's eyes widened in disbelief. But I looked at her and said word by word, making myself crystal clear. "First, I will only sponsor your tuition and basic living expenses. I will transfer the money to your card on time. Other than that, we should not have any unnecessary contact. Second, you must receive professional psychological treatment until the doctor deems you fully recovered. I will cover the costs. Third, and most importantly, my gaze became more serious than ever before. Sachinu, you must remember that your life is your own. No one can be your crutch forever. You have to walk your own future. If you ever dare to use self-harm as a way to threaten me or anyone else, then next time, I absolutely will not care about you. I mean what I say." After I finished speaking, the hospital room was completely silent. Sachinu stared at me blankly, the tears in her eyes slowly stopping. After a long while, she looked at the sunlight outside the window, then back at me. Then she slowly, solemnly nodded. "Okay." At that moment, I saw in her eyes, which had always been shrouded in haze, for the first time, a glimmer of true light that belonged to her. And in my heart, the huge stone that had been weighing on me for 20 years also seemed to quietly fall. At this moment, I walked out of the hospital room without looking back. I knew this was the real farewell. A farewell to the past, a farewell to hatred, and a farewell to that self trapped in a nightmare, unable to break free. From this day on, my life truly begins. Honey, can you rate this story in the comment section? On a scale of 1 to 10, please. If you like this type of story, please